This is the fatherhood experience. Turn it up, cause tonight you'll learn how to leave behind the average dad life. This the fatherhood experience. It's time to leave my family and become the father figure I deserve to be. The fatherhood experience.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fatherhood Experience, where we help dads become the most elite fathers they possibly can. I am your host today, Jason Priest, and I've got a very special guest with me today. Today with me, I have Mr. Andy Heller, who is a successful businessman and not a divorce professional, such as a divorce attorney, mediator, therapist, co-parenting counselor, or the host of other professionals that support and service those going through divorce. Among his professional accomplishments, Andy co-authored 2 best-selling real estate investment books in the 2000s. But while those books were well received, Andy had no interest in writing another book until he went through his own divorce. And so I'm excited for this episode, guys. If you get any value out of today's episode, which I'm sure you will, if you are somebody that's currently going through marital problems, or you have already gone through divorce, if you get any value, just share the show. That's all we ask, man. Drop us a review, share the show, help us spread the word. We're not here to bore you. We're not here to waste your time with ads. We're here to add as much value as we can to your life. So without further ado, Andy, welcome to the show, man. You and I have already had some dialogue prior to the show, so I know this is going to be a fun interview. Let's dive in.
I love it, Jason. I guess, should I finish my story about why I wrote the book and then get to some questions and help people out?
Yeah, man. Let's start there, dude. Like, if you can give us, give me a little bit of a brief background on how you got to be with us today. I guess what I would like to know first, just for my own personal knowledge, and I know that we have a lot of guys out there that are trying to level up in all areas of life, but I guess, can you give us a little brief synopsis on the real estate piece and really how kind of what your experience was there, and then transition that into your story with the divorce and the third book? Sure.
So I actually have my finger in a number of businesses. I run a professional, an international freight forwarding company, and all the while I've invested in real estate. I wrote a couple books on my investment model, and then started traveling the country and teaching others how to invest. So that's the real estate piece, and I still do a little bit of that today. Love it. There's nothing I like better than teaching somebody, and which kind of like brings me here to try to help some people out who went through, like you said, what can be a really traumatic event for men.
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I would like to pick your brain on some real estate stuff at a later time. But it's something that I've started to get a little bit involved in. In fact, I had a call with one of my network friends today on some initial real estate discussions just on what's going on here in the Metroplex and Dallas area. So I have to pick your brain on that later. But let's talk about the divorce thing. And let me preface this by saying this, because I think this will be valuable for our audience, is that, I come from a divorced family, and most of my audience knows that. My relationship with my dad is not great. And I that's why I want to preface it, because I know that a huge focal point for you, at least on the data and the information that I have on you, is that you were not going to settle for that. You were not going to. You wanted to remain a strong part of your kids' lives, which I highly respect. And I'm not saying that my dad didn't want that, but my parents got divorced maybe when I was 2 or 3, something like that. After my parents moved to Texas from Michigan. And so I grew up in a single parent household. My dad had partial custody, and I would see him every other weekend. And as I got older and I got friends, and when you start doing the things as kids where you're doing the sleepover thing, and you're doing the go out and play till the street lights go off, right? That was a thing back when you and I were growing up. Yep. The street lights were the signal to come home. I had that going on, and as a young boy, like, my friends were everything to me, especially when I was in a single parent household. And so I have a very negative view of when I was growing up. Like, I would dread the every other weekend, because I would have to go see my dad instead of being able to continue to nurture those relationships and do the things that I wanted to do, which I was a selfish 9, 10, whatever, however old I was. And so I have a very, very vivid memory of divorce in my life, and it did impact my life greatly. And again, my dad and I to this day don't have a real strong relationship. And so I'm excited for this interview, because I know that there are some divorced dads in our community inside the Fatherhood, and even in some of our other programs, our Fit Father Accelerator program, and some of the other things that we do. And I know that they're going to get a lot of value out of this. And so I would love for you to kind of dive in and really take us down this path of how it all happened and what were your steps beyond that, and then we'll get into some questions.
Great. So I'll give my story really quickly, so that way we can help people as much as possible on our podcast today, Jason. So basically, I consider myself, I run successful businesses. I am a very compromise-oriented, reasonable man. My friends come to me for advice. I'm that guy, all right, that in every group of friends. So I had a traumatic divorce myself, and at the advice of a co-parent counselor, she said to both my ex-wife and me, why don't you guys get a therapist? You can probably benefit from that. So I was like, okay, this can't hurt. So I got this therapist, and she was amazing, Jason. And a couple of things. Now, when I am stressed, as I was through my divorce, I don't sleep a lot. So I read a lot of other books about divorce. All right. Now, over the course of a couple years, I would come into the therapist's office, something would happen, and I would say, okay, this happened with my wife, or this happened with my ex-wife, but don't worry, I thought it through, and this is what we're going to do. And she would go into her therapy speak, well, Andy, it's really good that you think that way and thought it through, but you're not going to do that. You can do the opposite. And I would listen as the advice came out of her mouth, Jason. I'm like, oh my God, her advice is so good. The impression that I was left with is that I am a very reasonable man. I'm very much about compromise. I did not realize the extent that I was emotionally compromised and was not able to make good decisions. And I realized that when she came with the advice, that once I heard it out of her mouth, it was like, oh my God, that makes so much more sense than what I had intended to do. Sure. The other thing about me is that when I'm stressed, besides reading, I write. I just take notes. When my mom was in hospice, I was writing because I couldn't work. And my notes became an article that got covered in 5 newspapers around the country in a Mother's Day after she passed away. So I looked at these notes about 2 or 3 years into it. I'm like, oh my God. After having read all these other books, I got an outline here for a book that's unlike anything that's out there. So what's different about my book is that it's not written by a divorce professional. So I'm not coming from an attorney's perspective. I'm not coming from a co-parenting or a therapist perspective. I'm a guy who went through a divorce. And with these notes, divorce, I look at it, it's a journey. Okay. Sure. And it's an experiential journey. And during this journey, guys and gals, you're going to do some things good, some things kind of okay, you could have done better, and you're going to do a lot of things horribly wrong. And you're going to realize this after the fact. The problem is that you need this counsel on day 1, not day 300 or 400 or 500. So the structure of my book is it takes 46 tips, strategies, or situations that you guys are likely to encounter, not just during the divorce, but in the co-parenting, sometimes years after. It gives you these tips on day 1 with a specific goal of getting through the divorce easier. And not just you landing in a better place, but your spouse, and most importantly, your children. So there's not a book like mine that's out there, and I'm pretty excited about it, particularly the early reviews, particularly from the therapy community, is very humbling, Jason. So that's enough about me. I would love to share some of these tips and answer your questions and see if we can help some people today.
Well, so a couple things there, man. I love that you mentioned, and in the intro, I pointed it out as well. So it's obviously something that's very important for you to point out and disclose that you're not a therapist, you're not a counselor or anything. So I love that. I love the real life perspective, because I think a lot of guys are hesitant to maybe take advice is not the right way to. They're hesitant to value maybe suggestions or strategies that are suggested to them by mental health professionals, therapists, counselor, all these things. because oftentimes, and I know that this holds true across the whole medical community almost now. It's almost like you're put into a box, right? It's like a scripted process. And so if you go, you go to therapists, you go to counseling. I know that there are some damn good therapists and counselors out there, but oftentimes men, and we're stubborn and we're set in our own ways often, but we might think that we know better, right? We know best, and you're somebody who doesn't know me and my situation, and you're going to give me these suggestions, and you don't know anything about my marriage and all this. And so there's probably a big wall or a big some resistance there when you're getting advice, right? Because like, how do you know better than me? It's my wife, right? So I love that you come from a real life perspective. I guess, when it comes to the divorce thing, that I guess these things happen for a multitude of reasons. But do you feel was there any possibility that you feel like your marriage could have been saved if one of you would have done more or done something differently?
My particular marriage, no. A lot of marriages, yes. And it's funny. And let me just add one more thing about the composition of the book. This book is not about Andy Heller's divorce. What I did is I interviewed dozens of couples who went through challenging divorce and landed in good places, where they went well, where they went wrong. I interviewed kids therapists. I interviewed therapists who work with divorced men, divorced women. I interviewed attorneys and mediators. My book is a collection of their advice, and I'm just a businessman who organized it in a manner as a best practices manual. So one of the first chapters in the book for you guys who've not yet made that decision is we talk about, I kind of frame for you, is your marriage stale and needing some help and some new energy, or is your marriage broken? And that is actually, it's really interesting you started with that question. It is a question today, and we live in a immediate gratification society.
Yes.
That sometimes that can be pretty cloudy. So the first thing we need to do, men, is to figure out, try to define where we are in our own marriage. Me particularly, mine was done. I was very confident that was the right path. But for most, I would say many or most, it's not so sure a decision. So you've got to spend some time, look in the mirror, reflecting, maybe meet with some professionals to identify, is your marriage stale or is your marriage broken?
Okay. No, I love it. And I think, I guess the reason I asked this question is because, we've got a higher divorce rate in this country than we ever have. And it doesn't seem like it's slowing down. And it saddens me, Andy, because we've gotten to a day and age now where if you look at this younger generation and what's being pushed on social media and really the media in general, it's this hookup culture, right? Like there's a big push for don't get married and don't have kids and don't settle down. We're stripping the family unit out of our country. The fatherless homes are becoming more and more common, which skyrockets crime, as you well know. And when you strip the dad out of the household and you say, don't worry about having kids, go fix your finances and go pursue your dreams, and you can get married later on down the road. That's just not how our country has operated for a long time, right? Like we come from a day and age, like you've got a little bit of age on me, but like for our grandparents and beyond, right? They were getting married in their like teens and early 20s, right? And my wife and I got married at 25. My wife was 23. So we were pretty young considering like what they recommend today, right? Or I don't know who recommends, but like the culture that's being pushed. And so it maddens me to see that this is happening because, I mean, again, generally speaking, when a divorce happens, the dad is not as proactive as you have been with your children. And we'll get into that. But like what I'm witnessing is divorce happens, maybe and we haven't gotten into that part of your story, but, wife and kids move somewhere else. And then you're stuck with the decision. Do I move? Do I continue my business? Or do I move cross country so I can remain a part of my kids' lives? And like a lot of guys, they don't take that responsibility. It's like, okay, I'll just mail the money across and we'll go. And so I guess my question to you is, with what you're seeing, number one is, do you feel like you have a solution to, or at least some suggestions to potentially fix the divorce rate? Like from your standpoint, what do you feel like needs to happen for this trend to go away, for us to have the divorce rate start going the other way?
Sure. Well, yeah, I've got a great suggestion, and it's also in the book. If you feel your marriage is over and or struggling, before you do anything, commit you and your wife to therapy, marriage counseling. And I'll tell you how it's going to win no matter what. Okay. Now, the statistics are not really good, Jason, but you have to take into account that marriages that go into counseling are already damaged. Okay. But statistically, and this is a reference in the book, around 17% of marriages can be saved, which is not insignificant when you consider it's like 1 in 5 when the marriages are challenged to begin with. Okay. But the reason why I suggest, even if you are certain that your marriage is over, why is therapy then a good deal? Why would you want to delay 3, 4, 5, 6 months? I'll tell you why, guys. Every adult at some point dissects the marriage of their parents. You're talking about it here, Jason. Okay. We all do this as adults. So if we are going to be if your children are going to be the children of a split home, as adults, they will be able to say, you'll be able to say to them, guys, our marriage was not healthy, but before we called it quits, you guys were so important that we committed ourselves to therapy to try to salvage it. This is going to have such a powerful message for your children and a huge benefit. Think about it. It's not changing the outcome, guys, but you are changing the message to the children, and that's important. The message to the kids are, you were so important that we did every possible thing we could before we threw in the towel. So one of the things in my book that can hopefully turn that around, even if it's only 1 in 5, is the commitment to therapy before you make the decision to separate.
I love it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And the reality is I love that you come from a place of making the children first, right? They're the number one priority. Because if there are no kids in the picture and you're convinced and she's convinced it's over, well, then maybe it's not as big of a priority to try to work it out. But dude, like I'll be honest, I come from a divorced family. My wife comes from a divorced family. My wife and her mom and dad, they got divorced when my wife was my wife is the oldest of 4 children. And my wife, I want to say she was like 15 or 16 or something when this happened, early teens, maybe a little younger than that, but she was the oldest, right? So their divorce shook that family. It rocked that family. And my wife, my mother-in-law was in a very challenging spot. She had 4 kids now that she's in charge of. And so my wife had to step into a role and be more of a leader and help out for my mother-in-law, because she was the oldest, right? And so it's got some, there's some trauma related to that. And, I don't know all the details of what they tried and all that, but I love that you come from a place of making the children a priority, because like you said, whether the counseling works or not, or the therapy works or not, you're showing your kids, right? I'm a big lead by example guy, and kids do what we do way before they do what we say. And, it's not to say that your kids are going to grow up, get married, and then potentially have a divorce and remember back and be like, oh yeah, I remember when dad tried to go to therapy to fix it. And, now I need to do that. That's not what I mean by lead by example, because hopefully your kids, that's not the scenario for them. But you showing them that you're leading from a place of making them the priority, right? Like you guys are the number one priority. And I'm leading by example by showing you that we're doing everything we possibly can to make this up or make this work for you. That just, that's going to always sit with them, right? There's going to be that sense of love and that sense of connection to you and your ex-spouse, knowing that you guys at least put in every last ditch effort you could to save the marriage. And so I love that. I guess my next question for you in terms of really, strategy here is, look, every relationship is different, right? Everybody's scenario when it comes to divorce, there's a unique set of circumstances, generally speaking, right? And I'm not going to sit here and try to rattle off all of them, because sometimes it's drugs and alcohol, sometimes it's a porn addiction, sometimes it's you cheated, right? Like million and one opportunities or options there when it comes to divorce. My question to you is, when did you know, when were you convinced? Like, did you already know that divorce was happening before therapy started? You had already convinced yourself, or did you go into therapy with more of an open mind and actually saying, I think we can make this work? Like, had the mind already been made up for you personally?
For me personally, no.
Okay.
And I want to be really strong with this point. I believe it's completely in your children's interest and yours for you to insert therapy, even if you are 99% certain that is the right path.
Sure.
For the reason I already conveyed to Jason, because it sends a message to your children about the importance of the family unit before the decision is made. One of the most powerful quotes in my book, I had a divorce confidant, and this was actually, again, the book is not about me, but there's sprinklings in there of lessons I personally learned. And my divorce confidant, he said one of the most powerful things: you and your spouse, you guys will eventually land in a good place. Your children never recover from divorce. So the message I took from that, and as I did my interviews, Jason, it was all about, okay, given that we are altering the course of their lives, what are the steps that we can take to lessen that damage, so that because we got divorced, our children are not necessarily going to have the same outcome in their lives. So a lot of the book is written with that type of counsel intended, so that our kids can have as well-adjusted a life as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's important to know, because, again, I think it comes back to making the children the priority. But, I don't have anything to judge off of other than that I come from a divorced family, right? Like, so that's my experience. And, I'm pretty convinced that it was the right decision for my parents, because, like they continue to butt heads for the rest of my life. Right. And so my mom has since passed away. I lost my mom 2 months after my wife and I got married. So I was 25, my mom was 49. Yeah, but we're still to this day, the worst day of my life. Very unexpected. Yeah. And my wife and I had, or my wife and my mom had started to build a good relationship. They were getting very close. My wife was all about kids, right? Or my mom was all about kids. When are you guys going to have kids? Kids. We waited 10 years before we had kids. And so my mom was 10 years too late. And so obviously 49 is too young for anybody to go. But I love that you keep circling back to making the children the priority, because I think at the end of the day, man, like when you really consider the importance of your role in your children's lives, like for the dads out there who truly take it serious, because there's some dads that are just, they're pieces of shit. I'll just be honest with you. And you gotta own that before you can get better. Some dads choose not to be a part of their kids' lives, and I can't even fathom that idea. And so, but I think we're speaking to most dads when, like, whether ex-wife is in the picture or not, like that's my number one priority. We had a guy come out to our retreat in Vegas back in November. And he's one of our divorced dads. And, he's got some challenges with his ex-wife. There's a lot of headbutting going on there. And he talks about it often. It's like, man, I got to continue to work at this. And all I care about is my kid, right? That's my number one priority. And so I think, no matter where you and your potential ex or ex are on that wavelength, the children, your kids are your number one priority. And so I guess what I'd like to know from here is really like because we talked about it a little bit before the show, and I know this was probably one of your maybe one of your more difficult decisions to make in terms of business and career and all that. But you talked about how you lived in Georgia, all right? And you talked about how one day you woke up and your ex-wife and your kids were were gone and they moved to California, and you had to make a decision. Am I going to be the dad that sends money and pays my child support and just pays my dues? Or am I going to be the involved dad? And so talk to me about that and how that went down and what kind of challenge that was that presented to you in your life.
So for me, I had a really challenging predicament. I had just started a new company in Atlanta, and my kids were on the West Coast now. And I made the decision, for lots of reasons, I had to keep the business in Atlanta. I felt if I tried to move my business, it would fail.
Sure.
So, and this is going to sound crazy, guys, but I love my kids. I wanted to be a part of their life. I didn't want to just be the dad who sent checks across the country. So I kept the business in Atlanta and I moved to California so I could be a part of their lives. And I'm convinced to this day, I kept Delta in business for about 5 years there. I was like a ping pong ball going from Atlanta to the Bay Area and back and back and back.
Sure.
It was the best thing I ever did in my life. And when I was able to turn lemonades from lemon, I built a nice company, and it prospered. But the first 5 years were brutal. But I'm so happy I did this. And I will say to you dads, where logistics I find can be a really, really important thing, and something that we really tend not to focus on as the household is split into two. I actually say it's absolutely one of the biggest things you have to look at. You want to be geographically close enough so you can be impactful in their lives. You don't want to be in a different city where you are the place they go to where it's away from their friends. If birthday parties are not in your city, where it's not such a big deal when the kids are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But once they get into middle school, you want to be close enough to your former spouse that you can really co-parent without there being a big inconvenience on the children. It's going to make it easier for the kids to spend time with you, and for you in turn to be a part of their lives. But it could be pretty darn inconvenient, as it was for me. I left my all my friends, my business, my sister were all in Atlanta, but not my children.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very tough thing to do, and that I can imagine that. I love the Delta. You kept Delta in business. I think because I think that comes up a lot in divorce, is like sometimes the ex just wants to get as far away from possible from the other ex as possible. And that's one thing I can say about my dad is, he lived in the town where my mom and I lived in, and made the every other weekend thing as seamless as possible, and tried to be at all my sporting events. And he showed up. Like he wasn't an absent dad by any means. He was present. Just we butted heads a lot, and it's more of a personality thing than anything else. And it is what it is. I've accepted it. I've asked for forgiveness. I apologize for everything that I've done for him. And we're going to a hockey game tomorrow, right? And so it's as good as it's going to get. I didn't want that weight on my shoulders as I age, because I just want him to know that I love him for who he is, and I want him to be a part of my kids' lives, right? Like they only have 2 grandpas. They only have 1 grandma. The other grandma, well, my dad remarried, so they did technically have that grandma as well. But so I understand how that's challenging. I guess for me, I guess the next thing I'm wondering is really when you went through the divorce, right? This is a rocky time, and I'm not sure, like, I guess from the time where you guys filed for divorce until everything was finalized, like what kind of timeline is that for you?
It was about a year and a half.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And were you guys, did you, when you made the decision, we're getting a divorce, is that when she left and then it took a year and a half to finalize, or how did that?
No. She moved with the children. And then, I've got to kind of keep everything rated G here and all, but the longest story short is that she moved with the children and didn't come back. So I had to follow. And then we lived together for a time, and then but a short time, like 6 months, and then realized that just, the marriage was broken. We'd already done therapy in Atlanta, and then I moved out and lived with friends for 3 months. I got my head together and kind of figured out, where I want to live, how I want to live. I also used those 3 months to save money, because I was taking care of my ex-wife and well, she's currently my still wife at the time, and the children, but I didn't have the funds at that point to pay for 2 residences in the Bay Area.
Sure.
So so I was basically chasing my children, and I recalibrated and rebooted my life in a different city, all so I could be a part of their lives.
Yeah, that's a huge, well, number one, it's very commendable, because again, like that's becoming more and more rare, as we've already mentioned. But I think any dad that's going out, it's like, did you ever have the mentality? Because like it's very easy to lean toward the victim mentality, right? It's like, did you ever start having the thoughts of like, why is this happening to me? Or were you more on the wavelength of, you know what, this is what it is, and I'm going to do everything that I can to make this better? What kind of initial thoughts did you have? Because I know that, like some of our guys that are dealing with it now, it's like I just can't understand. Like everything was good, and we had such a great marriage and everything was going well, and now like I'm here, and did the victim mentality kind of cross your mind, or how did you handle that?
Not really. For me, I felt like a human voodoo doll. The thing about me, Jason, I'm a glass half full guy, and I try to convey that guidance in my book. But I felt like a voodoo doll at the time. My new business, what I can tell you about it is, if it starts to grow, it eats cash. Well, so you can have assets, okay? You can, let's say, have a property, a real estate property, but you can't go through the McDonald's drive-through and order a Big Mac and pay for it with equity you have in a home. So the challenge I was managing the needs of the cash in order to allow the business to grow, but also be able to take care of my wife and my children, and eventually leave a little bit for me to be able to live and create an environment where I could be comfortable, and so could my children. And there was a period for me where it was, okay, I just didn't want to, every day something bad was happening, and I felt like a human voodoo doll. What I will say to all of you is I'm convinced that most men are that. I don't know about the victimhood. I think that happens with a lot, but at some point you feel like a human voodoo doll. I will say to all of you who are on the early stages, it will get better. Okay. And then, doing things like listening to Jason's podcast, reading books like mine, and maybe even getting a therapist for a handful of months. These are things that can help us shorten that window and get to a good spot faster. But it's typically a period, I find, of anywhere from 6 to 18 months where we just feel like, every day is a challenge, and for most marriages that separate, there's a period of time where you and your ex are just are going to be like oil and water, and that will improve also. In general, in most co-parenting arrangements, it will get better. But again, that's a big part of, you've got to have the skills and the tools to be able to not to insulate your children and continue to raise them during that period of time when you and your ex when that relationship is the most toxic.
I can understand that. Yep. No, that makes sense. And it's I guess there's so much work that goes into a marriage, but after hearing your thoughts and your journey here so far, there's also a lot of work that goes into a divorce, right? And so,
oh my goodness, yeah,
it's you went through a year and a half of this. It sounded like a full-time job, just managing the divorce and trying to get this thing settled. So, I guess was there a point where you're like, enough is enough, and you just take what you want, or like what were your absolute must-haves during the divorce, I guess, negotiating process? Like, who gets what?
You've got like 3 or 4 great points in there. So let me start with the ladder and then work backwards.
Sure.
One of the things I talk about in the book is it's really important, guys, because you've got all these emotions percolating. Get a piece of paper and write down 2 divorce goals, at most 3. Give it to your attorney and say, this is really important to me. I'm compromising everywhere else. That focus, forcing yourself to focus and identify the 2 most important things or 3 most important things and compromise everywhere else, it's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars in attorney bills and hopefully help you achieve these things that are really important to you. Okay.
Sure.
Now to the first part of your question. So I just started my own business, everybody. And yet I realized at a point I was spending 2-3 hours a day dealing with issues around trying to communicate effectively with my ex-wife and navigate the divorce and everything. And I kind of had, this is going to sound corny, Jason,
okay,
a conversation with myself. Okay. You know, the only person that can be changed in this relationship is me.
Yep.
All right. And I'm also a Dale Carnegie disciple. And again, what I'm saying to you right now is in the book. I began to bring in the Dale Carnegie skills that I use effectively in business and challenge in business relationships.
Sure.
I began to use these with my ex-wife, but she was still my wife at the time. And I found that all of a sudden, my 2 to 3 hours a day became an hour a day, which became eventually 30 minutes a day, which became about 10 minutes a day. Okay. And it wasn't a coincidence also that my relationship with my children improved and my business started to grow. So there's a really big point I'm going to make from this. And this is probably, if you do get my book, you will notice something very quickly. And in all these interviews I did with couples, it was like, I wish she would do this. I wish he would do this. I wish she would do that. I wish he would do this.
Okay.
You cannot change your spouse or your former spouse. You can only manage how you deal with him or her better. Sure. The book deals with unilateral steps. This is a very important word. Unilateral steps that you can take that can make your management of your children's life, your co-parenting, easier, not just for you, but for your former spouse. And most importantly, is your children will benefit from this. The focus is on unilateral steps. There's nothing you can do. This great podcast that you listen to is not going to make your ex-wife like this or make your ex-husband like that. Right. But you can change how you deal with him or her. I can give you an example or two if you want, but this is a really important point. Focusing on unilateral steps that you can control and you can take can have a massive impact on making your life easier.
I love it. And the reason I love that so much is because it's about personal responsibility, right? It's like you getting brutally honest with yourself and realizing that the only person that you can impact is yourself. And I think that goes across so many spectrums, because obviously, you know, with what we do, health and fitness are the foundation for living your best life. And that's really what that's step one in the fatherhood, right? Like, hey man, we got to get this straight before you can experience the rest of what life has to offer for you. And so, and we tell them, right? Like, it's about being brutally honest with yourself and taking full responsibility for you and your decisions. And we can't control external circumstances, but what we can control is the way that we react to those external circumstances. So one thing that I know that I've been working on a lot is pausing before I yell at my kid, right? Like if my 7-year-old does something that I don't like, pisses me off, and he does it quite often because he's 7, right? They're really good at that at 7 years old. I got my 2-year-old over here that's like sweet and innocent little toddler, just toddling around. He's all cute and cuddly. And then the 7-year-old's like talking back. No, and like he's a pretty good kid. But when he wants to act out, I see myself in him. I was a little shit when I was 7 too. So I get it. But so
wait till he's 16, Jason.
Oh, I'm prepared. I know it's coming. Coming.
You're gonna wish he was 7 again.
I understand. Like he's we're gonna have some trying times ahead, and that's okay. Like I'm intent on making him a respectful or helping him become a respectful, productive member of society. I don't care what he is when he grows up. I'm going to encourage him to do something that's going to be profitable and lucrative for him. But if he wants to be a janitor, go be the best damn janitor you can. Just be respectful, respect others, respect your country, yada, 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 all that goes into it. Right. So, and that's all we can ask for with our kids, right? We can't control what they do when they grow up. But for me, a big kind of foundational principle of being the ultimate leader in your own life is taking full responsibility. And I think that what you just walked us through and how you handled the divorce yourself personally is, it's all about you realizing that, look, I can only control what I can control, and I'm going to make the best decisions that I possibly can to move my life forward and have a positive impact on my children and do everything that I possibly can to give them the best foundation. And so let's move on a little bit here, because tell me again how old your kids are now.
Right now, my daughter's 17. We're filling out college applications. She's in her last year of high school. My son is 15 and a freshman in high school.
Okay, love it. So I guess I'd like some insight here, and really for our audience, on the co-parenting side of things, because obviously I believe you're remarried. Yes, am I accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm remarried and happily remarried, and she's amazing.
Love it. The only I assume that because I saw her walk in the background. But anyway, so you're remarried. How long? This is just a short one, but how long were you single before remarrying your wife?
Oh, I was single, I think 7 years, but I was not alone. So, and this is also very important, guys and gals. I insulated my children from shorter term girlfriends. And so my current wife is the only woman they met after their mom.
I love it.
I met her, I think, about 2 years or so after. We dated for about 4, and we've been married for 3. So the important point I would say there is I gave my children a vision of stability. I was dating for a few years. I had some shorter term girlfriends, but my children did not meet them. Even if the girls wanted to meet my children, I did not feel it was appropriate.
I think that's awesome.
One of the things we talk about in the book is, if you see yourself with that woman, I mean, therapists sometimes say, well, if it's 6 months, whatever. I actually don't agree with that. One of the wisest things I heard, actually from another divorcee that went into the book, is if you see yourself with that man, if you see yourself with that woman 2 years from now, then it's probably okay for their children to meet that person.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think there's a lot of power behind that, because, when you think about it, when you say, if you can see yourself with that person, right, that's your own perspective. But there's a certain amount of power that goes into that 2-year projection, because when you give your brain that kind of like commitment, right, it's like, okay, I really need to think about this. Because I love that you sheltered, we'll call it sheltered, your children from any previous girlfriends that weren't going to be in the picture. Because the last thing you want your kids to see is like, okay, well, dad's like, he's back on the market, and now he's just ripping through 4 and 5 women at a time, and now you got like dad's like the pimp over here, right? And so I love that you, and that's the extreme, right? I love that you sheltered them from it, though, because I think that's going to be, and I'm sure they'll find out later on in life, but I think for now and where they're at in their lives now, that's absolutely the right decision, because that the whole word of stability, it means something different to children, right? It gives them a feeling of, I don't know if safety or protection is the right word, but seeing dad not be, all over the map with his emotions and his dating and his, I just think stability is important for kids, and you tried to establish that early on in the process. And so I love that. Any advice for, how'd you meet your wife, current wife, and any advice for the guys out there who are trying to get back into the dating scene. That was one of the things that one of our guys talked about. It's like, hey man, I don't even know where to start. Obviously, I'm not going to go to a damn bar. I know there's a lot of online kind of things now, which I have a little hesitancy towards, because those came out like that initially started right when I was in my late teens or early 20s. They had like a dating site or two. And I remember logging on there. I didn't have a girlfriend. I'm like, this is really weird. Like, I'm supposed to pick out a profile and then like message this person and then randomly go meet a stranger. We've never flirted or anything, and we're going to go out on a date. And I'm supposed no. And so any advice out there for dads who are looking to get back into the dating game?
Yeah, well, I've got a lot. I'm going to try to get it out there. And again, there's probably like 3 or 4 chapters. I'm going to give you guys bullet points right now. I was introduced to my wife. So through a client that knew her. So the big picture. Okay, so there's tons of online options, guys. Sure. Be careful; it can be like quicksand. And I actually got some great advice from a female friend of mine. She's like my best girlfriend, and she said, before you go on a date, insist on that you meet somebody on one of these sites, insist on talking to them for 10 minutes. And this was great, Jason, because
I like that.
I eliminated half of potential dates
and a lot of money wasted.
Yeah. So that saved me time and help, and also was good for sanity. But here's a really big, powerful point. Many of us there's an absence of romance when we decide to get divorced that could be months or even years. So we're really desiring that. Yeah. But what many don't realize is we might not be ready for it. And people are out there divorcing dating before they're really emotionally ready. I got a great story. This date I went on, and it was a very attractive woman. I met her online. And she says to me, and we're talking about her current situation. I was still separated, but I was moving for divorce. She says, well, I'm separated. He's upstairs, I sleep downstairs. He wants to, but he wants to get back together, but I don't. And I said to her in a nice way, she's very attractive. I said, I wish you told me this on the phone. You're sharing the same home with your husband.
Yeah, current husband, not even divorced.
Husband, and he wants to reconcile. If
you told me this,
I would not have met you. So be careful, guys. You'll find a lot of really, lonely women, just as you might be lonely, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean everybody's ready. One of the smartest things that I did, and I talked about this in the book, I was definitely desiring to date again. I was lonely, romantic, and I was wanting romance, but I did have a sense that I wasn't ready for it. And actually here, Jason, this was a stage where my soon-to-be ex decided, and I decided that we're going to leave. We're going to split up. We set a date like 4 or 5 months in the future when I would move out, and began making preparations. So we're still cohabitating. So what did I do? I called this my bromance phase. I called up close friends and I said, look, I think my marriage is over. And a lot of our common friends are couples that we hang with, which is very normal for us when we split up. Can you introduce me to some other men who've gone through divorce and in your opinion have landed in good places? And this started what I called my bromance phase, Jason. And I would just go out and watch. I'm also a big hockey guy. My son plays hockey. I play hockey. So we would go. Tampa Bay Lightning. Okay. Yeah. So, but I like the Stars.
I'm a Red Wings guy, and we just smoked you, so I'm happy about that.
You got Stevie Yzerman, so you're going to be fine.
That was my. I'll tell you a little hockey blurb there, like. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I had to add this since we got on a little sports talk. For all you guys out there that have heard us talk about sports, you'll notice that probably over the years of doing this podcast, I talk less and less about it. And I think that's just a sign of maturity, because I truly believe that as we age and as you realize that the product on the field and these players and how you get all excited for this stuff, it starts to mean less and less because those guys don't know who you are from Adam. They don't care about you. They're not invested in you. And I almost have gotten to a point where it's like an escape from reality. I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy that, but like some guys out there get obsessed and let it consume their lives. And I was one of those guys. And I will tell you that ever since I broke away from that sports obsession, I got sports tattoos, Andy. I mean, it's like, it was bad. Okay. Once I broke away from like that sports, like addiction, if you will, and realized like, okay, I can tune in, but like my whole Sunday is not going to be consumed by a freaking Lions game. My happiness seemed to blossom a lot more. So I wanted to throw that in there that yes, I still love my teams. But the obsession, once I ended that, man, my life has gotten better. I'll be honest with you. So I figured
it's funny. Again, I think you and I have a lot in common. I may not have been quite as obsessed as you, but for me, it was a bandwidth thing. I just didn't have the time. I had to reduce the sports I followed. So, but the point I'm making there, guys, is so I started this bromance phase. I called friends, and they said, "Hey, I want you to meet this guy, Andy, whatever." And I began. So it did a lot of things for me. Number one, while we're still cohabitating, it got me out of the house. All right. And I could come back at a fairly early hour. I could look at my, at that time, wife in the eyes, and I wasn't fooling around or doing anything I might regret, but I was adding a social element to my life that I needed. And by the time I moved out 5 months later, I'd met 4 or 5 new guy buddies. And what happens when you have new friends? Through them, you also meet women. So it was the perfect sequence. So I recognized I wasn't ready to date, but I also recognized I needed an infusion of something new socially in my life.
Testosterone.
So this is the romance phase.
You needed some more testosterone in your life.
Yeah. And the other part is these were also guys who were either going through divorce or landed, and they were in my shoes, and it was so
that's awesome,
helpful. Yeah. And this is a really powerful piece of advice. So I think what I'm saying in a long about way with these other suggestions minced in here is don't rush. Okay. Yeah. You may sexually, you may need it. Emotionally, you may not be ready for it.
I think that's massive what you just pointed out, because I think what you're saying too is like, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but like the hookup culture these days, right? Like there's a difference between like, just having sex and then actual having intimacy. If you go on one of these dating sites and you go hook up with somebody and you have sex, but there's no physical connection, you're starting to, I'll be honest, like I'll call it what it is. You start to wear away at your soul. You start to wear away at like your core human emotions, right? Like sex starts to become less and less meaningful, right? And now it's like, okay, well, do I really want a partner or do I just want sex? And so I love that you said take your time, because if you do take your time, you emotionally recover from divorce. I could very much see how when you get into a better frame of mind, now the priority is not just sex, right? It's like, okay, I actually want a partner again. I want somebody that I can spend and share the rest of my life. My wife is my best friend. And we had a little bit of an argument this morning, and she's my wife is half Lebanese, and she's very she tells it like it is. She does kickboxing, and she is not intimidated by me in the least. And I'm scared to take a punch from her. She could probably knock me out. Okay, I can hold my own against her. I'm not saying that, but she's a tough cookie, and so but we're very big on the communication piece, and so. She was pissed off at me this morning, and I did a thing or two that probably ruffled her feathers, and it is what it is, right? But after I dropped my son off at daycare, my youngest at daycare this morning, she calls me like 5 minutes later. She is not someone who will just let it go. She is someone who, I want to finish this. I want to reconcile before our evening starts, because I want to have a nice Friday evening. I am not going to let this stew all day, so I'm going to get my 2 cents in, and I 100% respect her for that, because there's not a lot of women out there who are like that. They could potentially hold it in, be more reserved. And so our biggest piece of advice for anybody is communication. And I think you probably agree that open line of communication within any marriage is crucial for it to succeed and for it, because you're going to have bumps in the road, man. There's no perfect marriage out there. Every marriage has its ups and downs. And so, and obviously you're a walking, living example of that, because you're on I believe you're only your second marriage. I've got a guy in my network who has the wife of his dreams and I think they have 4 kids now. And this is his 4th marriage, right? But he finally found the one.
Wow.
So
more power to him that he still tried.
It's a very, very successful guy. One of the biggest sales trainer influencers in the space. We went to high school together. If I said his name, you would probably know it. And if you Google him, you'll see him all over the place. But he's on his 4th marriage. And clearly he wanted a partner. This wasn't just about sex for him. He wanted somebody that could be his rock, right? Now and now you found yours. And so I guess my last question, I know we're running short on time. This has been an awesome interview, and I'd definitely be interested in bringing you back. But I know that, I'm specifically thinking about a client or two right now. And I know this, and I know that there's a lot of guys that'll benefit from this, but what is your best advice and maybe it's just a simple communication thing, but obviously you have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, right? So you're very heavily involved in your kids' lives. And obviously you have to be still heavily involved in your ex's life because there's kids involved, right? What is your best advice, or what is your top advice? And I know this is in the book too, but the co-parenting thing, what is, how have you been able to make that so successful while maintaining some sort of, and I don't know, we didn't get too much into this, but I would assume that you and your ex-wife have at least somewhat of a healthy relationship as co-parents. How have you been able to be so successful with that? And shed some light on that, if you will.
Sure. Well, I'm just going to make one comment before I answer your question. I've got a great co-parenting relationship with my ex-wife, and we co-parent better than we got along when we were married. And it's because of steps that I took, and I think steps that she took. We landed in that place. There's 2 answers to your question. The first is I already talked on it, is logistics. Guys, stay geographically close. That will have a big impact, particularly as your children's age, on your ability to be. You don't want them to go to dad's house and have it be inconvenient for them, because that's going to affect the time you have. There will become a time when the kids are old enough. They say, I don't care what's on your MSA, your divorce document. I'm tired of going to your house, because then I can't hang out with my boyfriend, or I can't hang out with my soccer buddies.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. The other suggestion I would have that I haven't mentioned yet is it's very healthy to view divorce as a marathon and not a sprint. So now I'm speaking mainly to, well, not just people who haven't got divorced yet, but even those who've been divorced. Things don't look to have a certain arrangement as fast as possible if it's not manageable by you or in your children's best needs. I'll give you a really quick example. So the dad who wants to be active, who involved, who is close and wants and deserves 50-50 custody. But let's say the dad traveled. All right. So your children have been alone with mom, but they've not been alone with you. Being alone with you will be a new circumstance for them, but not being alone with mom. Look in the mirror and recognize that. And maybe if you travel for your job, you also may need some time to adjust your business life. So what's a good example of the marathon, not a sprint? You're in your divorce document. You'll get 50% custody, but you begin with, let's say, 30%. And then if your kids are adjusting well at a certain date, it goes to 35, to 40, to 45, to 50. And this is also putting your children's needs first, because remember, you may want 50%, you may deserve 50%, but your children, if you've traveled, have not been alone with you. They've been alone with your spouse. So recognizing for your children, alone daddy time is actually going to be a new phenomenon for them.
Yeah.
And let them gradually get into that. So understanding that what you get out of the gate is not as important as what your life looks like 2 or 3 years after you sign your divorce, is going to be really helpful for you to keep your sanity, your relationship with your former partner, and most importantly, for your children.
That's awesome, man. I love it because it's kind of like investing, right? It's like you say you buy a few shares of an ETF or something, right? And like you're not expecting it to blow up, right? Like you're not gonna go check that in a week. You put $100 in, you might go in a week, and maybe it's $105 or something crazy, right? You're not expecting to go in there and see $5,000 right out of the gate, but you know that if you keep putting in your little deposits, right? Your positive deposits into that, just like your positive deposits into your divorce and your children's relationships, that starts to grow, right? You start to reap more of the rewards or more of the gains or benefits, however you want to list that off. And so I like that because it's like kind of maybe lowering your expectations right out of the gate. Maybe maybe you feel like you deserve it, but maybe it's more of a, hey, I'm the leader of the family and I'm going to take it on my shoulders to prove that I deserve it by becoming an integral part of my kids' lives and making them want more of me, right? I love that because if you can get to that point where kids start saying, I want to be with dad more. I want to go see dad. Like hey mom, love it over here, but I'd like to go spend some time with dad. Like that's where the power is, because when your kids start wanting more of you because they love the time you spend together, well then like doesn't matter whether it's 30, 40 or 60%. The desire is there, which is way more important than the percentage listed off on the divorce, decree or final, whatever they call that thing. Would you agree with that?
I completely, and I'm going to sneak in one more quick suggestion. If you haven't signed your divorce yet, guys, or if you signed it and it can be amended on some level and you have weekends, make sure you got weekdays. This is a huge, and this is actually me talking. This did not come from any of the therapists I interviewed, and here was my rationale, and it worked out really great for me. You just don't want to be weekend dad, and right. if you can, because if you're there with kids when they're having trouble with their homework, you're picking them up from school, that the involvement in their life is going to be on a much higher level than if you're the place they go to on weekends. Okay. You're going to know their friends. You're going to know their teachers. You're going to get them when they've had that bad day. And the nature of the involvement will be different. So please try to get weekdays in your settlement so you can be a part of their school week.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's powerful. And I think most guys have it the other way around, right? It's like you get weekends. And it might be a little bit, I think you have to accept the fact that it's going to be a little bit more of an inconvenience to your life, right? It's going to be, it's a little bit of a time sacrifice, with your day to day. So instead of, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe you get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every other week. And now you're fully entrenched in the middle of their week, right? Which is the middle of like real life, right? The weekends aren't really real life, right? That's not where they learn. That's not where they grow. That's where they socialize. That's where they get to do the fun stuff. And so I think it's great advice. I love it. And I feel like, I don't ever want to divorce. My wife is Catholic. She does not believe in divorce. I've agreed to raise my children Catholic, and my wife's, this is a big thing. It's like my wife's parents are also Catholic and they got a divorce. And so there's a lot of internal challenges or internal struggles for my wife there because, I would never cheat on my wife. And I think if I did, she still wouldn't divorce me. We would do everything in our power to work it out because of how strongly she feels about the family unit. And I have a lot of respect about that. By no means do I feel like I have a hall pass, because that's an awful way of thinking. It's just, it makes me admire her even more about how committed she is to making our marriage work. But I love the advice of the weekday stuff, man. I think there's, you dropped a lot of great nuggets, especially for anybody out there that's having challenges right now with their marriage or who's going through or has already gone through a divorce. Last question, where can we find more about you, man? I know you got the book. We'll get all this into the show notes, but where can people find more out about Andy Heller?
Sure. Well, the book you can get, I just go to Amazon, guys. Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. My name is Andy Heller. We also got a website, takethehighroaddivorce.com, where podcasts like this great podcast are posted and some resources. And that's it. Those two places. Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Jason, I love your style. I love, particularly I feel there's not enough out there to help dads.
There's not.
And so for me to be on your show, for me to be just a businessman dad who wrote this book, we dads we have different challenges, guys. And so to have resources like this to help us, I think is fantastic. And I think the last thing I'm going to say to you is swallow your pride a little bit. All right. And read these books, listen to these shows, go find a good therapist. And you know what? It's going to help make you a better father. You're going to feel better about yourself, and you'll be able to get along better with your ex, which is going to be in everybody's best interest.
Love it. And, we're very big on the personal development and personal excellence side of things. And what you just described about the lack of resources for men is you nailed it earlier in the podcast when you said you went out and you had your bromance, right? You found some dudes that were going through the same shit as you were. Yep. And I will die on this hill saying that, especially when it comes to men, like community and brotherhood, there's literally nothing more powerful than that. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't have that sense of belonging, right? That sense of, that these guys have my back, you're going to always feel that gap. There's a missing piece in your life because men need more men, right? We need guys to be able to lean into. And that's why we're so proud of our culture that we built in the fatherhood is that, these guys, we found out the other day, my business partner and I, one of our clients told us that he's like, yeah, did you know that, me, so-and-so and so-and-so have been texting for the last year every single day. And we have not missed a single day yet. I'm like, holy shit, man, you guys came to one of our retreats. You exchanged numbers. We've not known anything about this. And you've literally been texting outside of the group every day is like, hey man, got your back. I love it. Got your back, brother. That right there is sometimes enough to keep you from going on the off the deep end. Sometimes enough to keep you from making the dumb decision that you shouldn't make, right? And so love that you highlighted that because you very much went through that, right? You found your bromance dudes, and now you're happily married again. And probably without that piece, you might not be with your wife right now. You might not have had that because you don't know how that would have went down. But obviously that was an integral part of your life and your story. And so really appreciate you coming on the show today. Really appreciate you sharing all this. And man, I know a lot of dads out there are going to benefit from this episode.
Jason, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Love to come back anytime you want me.
Andy, appreciate your time, man. Hope you and your family have an awesome holiday season. We'll definitely have to do it again sometime.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.